Thank you and welcome.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if there's anybody else here who is new, is there? And Sarah, I guess you're logging who attendees. Okay, shall we move on then? Can we just go through the minutes and actions from the previous meeting? I think there have been a number of questions. Well, that's been public participation, but minutes and actions from the previous meeting, I don't think there's anything. Most things have been completed. So unless anybody else has got any comments, are you happy that I sign off the meetings or the minutes? We all approve them?
Agreed.
Yep. Very good. All right, moving on. Public participation. I think the paper has been circulated to you that we have received some statements and some questions, and answers have been prepared and will be posted on the website. I don't know if any of the participants are here, but if they are listening, then they can see the responses on the website. Okay. Can we move on now to agenda item 4, which is updates from associate members? First on my list is from Peninsula.
Yeah, good afternoon. Good afternoon, Chair. It's Andrew Wiles here from Somerset County Council, member of the Peninsula Transport Officers Group and Peninsula Rail Task Force. Our main report here, as with yourselves, is that we were extremely pleased to receive news of the further DfT funding for the forthcoming financial year. That has allowed us to continue with a number of our workstream studies that had been commissioned last year that will progress into this year. And one of the first outputs of that will be the publication of a high-level transport strategy in June of this year, and then further studies and works leading to the publication of a detailed transport strategy at the end of the calendar year, around about December 21. And we will then continue with further work streams into the financial year 21-22. We continue to engage well with your good selves in Western Gateway. We recently attended your stakeholder forum, and we continue to work jointly on a number of areas, particularly around the rail strategic planning studies for the rail corridors through our joint areas. And we also continue to participate in some of your corridor study workshops. Thank you.
Thank you. Has anybody got any questions or any comments to make to Andrew? Jeff,
good afternoon, Andrew. It's Jeff Brown. Just to agreeing complete with what's been said by Andrew, but just to add that we've just had our last STB meeting before the elections, so it's been a pleasure to work with you, and I would like to think I'll be back after May, but we'll wait and see. The only concern that was raised that, well, two concerns, one particularly for Cornwall, which is the possible traffic congestion that we might experience in June with the G7, but more significantly across the board in the Peninsula was a concern about the levelling up levy and the fact that we seem to have come out of it rather worse than we expected to be.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. I suppose they'll all come in by helicopter though, won't they, to the G7?
Well, I think the plan is to fly them into Newquay Airport, where they're doing some significant groundworks at the moment, and then helicopter them to St Ives. Weather permitting, of course.
Yes, thus avoiding all the traffic problems when everyone else is on holiday. Right, okay, thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Jim, do you want to update us on the Transport and Business Forum, of which you're chair?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, we held a forum on the 10th of March. It was pretty well attended. Obviously, I think we managed to get around any challenges of holding the forum online. It went fairly smoothly. We had representatives from local authorities, ports, airports, bus companies, coach companies, Government Wales, business organisations, LEPs were attended, universities, rail companies. The aims of the forum really was to promote an understanding of the corridor strategy and the planned work programme. We then held a discussion on the importance of the corridors, and hopefully we achieved an understanding of the next steps and a commitment to feed all of the evidence so all of the feedback into the evidence gathering. We provided delegates with an overview of the Western Gateway Subnational Transport Body, gave them an update on the strategic transport plan. We then had a breakout into the 4 different corridors: Southeast to Southwest Southern Growth Corridor, the Southeast to Southwest Innovation Corridor, Midlands to Southwest Western Growth Corridor, and the Midlands to the South Coast Missing Link Corridor. We got a lot of feedback. We're in the process of gathering that into minutes. But, a number of key issues were raised by attendees. The importance of links to other subnational transport bodies and other regions, including Wales, and there were questions that were asked about the Western Gateway Powerhouse, and the links between the subnational transport body and the powerhouse. Other issues were an understanding of the competitive nature of funding at the moment, and a concern that we got sufficient funding for our own particular region and it didn't all disappear up into the north of England. There was an importance of looking at future needs, not just current requirements on the transport network. The issue inevitably of the environmental aspect was raised. Also the issues of resilience and an integrated passenger transport network. I think overall attendees welcomed what they perceived to be a new approach, not just looking at roads, but looking across the whole transport sector. So in all, I think it was a very positive event. It seemed to go relatively smoothly. We will be looking at the makeup of the forum to see that we've got all the necessary organisations attending. And I would like to say a big thanks to Alan Creedy, Ben Watts, Sarah Beatrice, James White and Nuala Waters for their assistance in putting together what was, I think, a pretty successful forum. Hopefully that gives you an understanding, Chair.
Yes, lovely. Thank you, Jim. I think that's very useful. Has anybody got any questions they want to ask Jim? I see no hands going up. Okay, you're let off. Swindon Borough Council, is anybody here from Swindon? Oh, Sam Howell has got his name up, hand up.
Good afternoon. She has, yeah. Sam Howell, Head of Strategic Transport and Infrastructure for Swindon Borough Council.
Do you have an update for us? Have we lost her? All right, let's come back to Sam if we can, if she's having problems. So shall we move on to DFT? David Glinos, I thought I saw your name appear, but you have sent through your report.
Yep, good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you've all received a copy of my sort of, I guess it's an update note of things, some key announcements which have been undertaken since the last board meeting 3 months ago or so. If I may take the opportunity, Chair, just to pick out a few things within the note. I don't intend to go through it line by line. STB funding. So as others have already said, we've had some very good news since the last meeting, in that we have been able to provisionally confirm a funding envelope of £425,000 for the 21-22 year. So that's commencing on 1st of April. That will be subject to ministers signing off your proposals when you put them to us, which we're expecting, I guess, at some point after this, in the days following this board meeting. Those plans will very much have to focus on the development of a transport strategy, and also on the provision of advice to government in regards to prioritising investment in the Western Gateway region. Read of interest the papers for this meeting, but I'm looking forward also to receiving the formal business plan proposal following in the days to come. COVID-19 work continues. And I continue to have regular updates and provide regular updates to key local authority transport contracts throughout the region. I won't go into that in any further detail now, unless there's any specific questions, which I can take at the end. We had a budget, of course, a couple of weeks ago. A number of announcements within that budget, which will be of interest to members of the board. The first one is the Levelling Up Fund, which is a 4.8 billion fund spreading across the remainder of the term of this Parliament. A prospectus was published at the time of budget, and further guidance is expected shortly to be released on exactly what is required in any bids put forward for the first bid round, which is taking place, which closes on the 18th of June. Just a quick reminder, Levelling Up Fund is all about investing in regenerating town centres, high streets, upgrading local transport, and investing in cultural and heritage assets. It's a joint DfT, HM, CLG, and Treasury fund. That's about it on the Levelling Up Fund. Other announcements in the budget. There's the Towns Fund. So some good news for Western Gateway members is that Bournemouth secured, there was an announcement that Bournemouth secured £21.7 million through the fund, and Swindon also, it was announced that Swindon would be beneficiaries of £19.5 million, so good news on that. There's an announcement on Freeports, although there was no successful Freeport applications in the Western Gateway region. There was one in the wider southwest for Plymouth and South Devon Freeport. Also announced at budget was the intercity transport settlement. So that is the 4.2 billion transport settlement for mayoral combined authorities. And as part of that announcement, an initial £4.1 million of capacity funding, revenue funding was announced for the West of England Combined Authority region to enable them to work up proposals to take advantage of the capital funding, which will follow the 21-22 financial year. Also announced in the week of the budget, but not actually at the budget, was walking and cycling investment allocations. So as you may recall at the spending review, there was a total of £203 million announced for 21-22 financial year for walking and cycling measures. So £173 million of that was capital and £30 million was revenue. On the 3rd of March, local authorities were each informed how much their revenue allocations would be for 21-22. For the capital allocations, these will be confirmed very shortly, but it's important to note that local authorities are required to respond to send through information to the department in regards to their local cycling and walking investment plans by the 19th of March, and also on how they are proposing to spend their revenue funding by the 19th of April. So good news for walking and cycling. Of course, that is part of the £2 billion wider commitment investment for walking and cycling for the duration of this Parliament. The remaining funding profile to be confirmed, hopefully at a multi-year spending review at the end of this year. Other announcements, highways maintenance funding allocations being communicated to local authorities. That was done on the 15th of February, and I attached links to the press release on that, but local authorities should all have the details of that. I also include some details on the local electric vehicle charging infrastructure scheme and links to that. And also the good news in regards to the A303 Sparkford to Ilchester joining scheme, but I'm sure my Highways England colleagues will elaborate on that and other news on the strategic road network following my update. A couple of key strategies. You may, well, I'm sure that everybody has picked up that the long awaited bus strategy. I didn't name the bus strategy. It's called Bus Back Better, but we'll just call it the National Bus Strategy for now. That was released earlier this week. Lots of stuff in there which you should be aware of. I'll pick out a few things. So basically, the whole point of the strategy is to get bus back to where it was before the pandemic, and then following that to increase patronage and raise buses' modal share. This is part of the £3 billion announcement for buses for the duration of this Parliament, and the key and the aim basically is to make buses more frequent, more reliable, easier to understand and use, and also for better coordinated with simpler, and also become better coordinated with simpler fares. Within the strategy, there was an announcement of 25 million to support partnership and franchise development, and this includes an immediate £100,000 allocations for every local authority to do that. It also included other changes such as Part 6 of the Traffic Management Act 2004, which allowed local authorities to enforce moving traffic offences. So work on that will be commenced this year. I know a lot of you have been asking for those powers. Also the introduction of 4,000 new zero emission buses, and we'll also be setting a date for the end of sale of new diesel buses in the UK. And we've launched a consultation on this along with this strategy. So how does that £3 billion investment break down? Well, that breaks down into £300 million for this year. So that's for the first instance for any further COVID-19 related support that will be required while progressing reform to deliver better outcomes. 25 million of that 300 million will be given to local transport authorities, as I said earlier, to develop the skills and people they need to implement the strategy. And in addition to the £300 million, there'll be £120 million for 21-22 to start the introduction of the 4,000 zero emission buses. Other key stuff to be aware of in the strategy is that local authorities will be required to devise local bus service improvement plans, and that will set out how bus priority fares and ticketing will be enhanced, drawing on the £3 billion of additional funding. As I said, we will also support local authorities with the transformation with the £25 million. And there's some key dates within the strategy. The key dates being by the 30th of June, we are seeking a commitment from local authorities that they will be pursuing an enhanced partnership or a franchising arrangement. And that also to be aware of that further local authority and operator support through CBSSG grants or through other discretionary funding regimes will be dependent on that commitment. So if you don't do that, if you don't take that forward, you will not be beneficiaries of funding going forward from following that date. By the 31st of October, local authorities should publish a bus improvement plan, of course in collaboration with operators, which sets out how they will use new powers to improve services. And then from April 2022, new discretionary funding will be available, but that will only be, as I said, to areas with an enhanced partnership or those which are pursuing a franchise. So that's a whistle-stop tour of the bus strategy. There's lots of other stuff in the strategy. I urge you to read it in detail. The final thing I wanted to mention, which people have probably picked up on, is the Union Connectivity Review. It's probably of some relevance to Western Gateway, given its border to Wales. There is mention of rail capacity in Bristol within it, and also the M4 to South East strategic road network. So have a read of that. It may be of interest. But that is a whistle-stop tour of DFT stroke government's key announcements over the last 3 months or so.
So all quiet on the DFT front then.
Been a busy period.
Has anybody got any questions or comments they want to ask David? No, I can't see any. I just you mentioned in your report about the Plymouth and South Devon Freeport, and there was also Solent Freeport, I think, was announced, so which will probably affect the north-south corridor and other studies that we're doing considerably more than the South Devon one. But that's just a by the by. I suppose it's outside your region, is it just?
It is, but obviously it's relevant to the Western Gateway region.
Yeah,
Isn't
yeah.
it? It's
Okay.
important. Yeah.
Jim, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just briefly, Poole put in a bid for Freeports, as did Bristol as well. So we were, disappointed that we weren't successful. So we're waiting to get detailed feedback. I think we fitted all of the criteria that were set out, and obviously we're waiting to hear from government what the next steps are with Freeports, and whether there is the potential for a second wave. We were probably disappointed that government had restricted the number of Freeports to 10, and the view of the ports industry was, well, if it's a good idea, why are you restricting the numbers? If there are benefits, then they should be shared out amongst other ports around the UK. But anyway, obviously, congratulations to Plymouth and to Solent. And as you say, there will be an impact on our area potentially with the success of both of those three ports going forward.
Thank you, Jim. Jeff, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, if I can just indulge a moment, and apologies to David, because I think this is more a question for Jim, but it's about the Port of Poole. I'm just wondering how Poole's been impacted by the problems with Brexit and shellfish exports, because I know that certainly in Cornwall we're having serious problems in getting them out of the county and across the channel.
Yeah, I sit on the National British Ports Council. I've just come off a meeting this morning, and that was discussed at length. There obviously are major issues with exporting shellfish at the moment. Poole used to be the biggest exporter of any port in the country of live shellfish. Yeah, frankly, there's a long way to go, I think, before those, I think government's calling them teething problems, but before those issues are sorted out. The port itself at Poole, we lost all of our French ferry connections last year, but they started up again in January. There's still a big question mark of what's going to happen with the passenger ferries. The current government guidelines are that from the 17th of May, they could potentially start up again, but obviously that depends on what happens with COVID in the interim. Having said that, we were thankful that a new freight service, we currently run freight ferries down to Spain, but a new freight service was announced 2 weeks ago from North Africa, from Morocco into Poole, which is positive. So yeah, I think all the ports have been hit quite hard by COVID, and we're looking forward to hopefully things getting back to some sort of normality in the near future. Jeff.
Thank you very much, and apologies for the intrusion, David.
Okay, thank you. So no, if there are no other questions for David, thank you, David. It's always useful to receive your updates. Can I move on to Alice, darling? Alice, are you here?
I am. Yes, I am. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. Sorry. Yeah, I've got a number of things to go through, but I'll try and keep it to the headlines so that it's relatively brief. Just a couple of scheme updates first of all, because I think I promised these last time. So on the Stonehenge scheme, the A303 Amesbury to Berwick Down, you may have been seeing press reports that the date for judicial review has been set. It's not quite true, because what's happened is that the judge has set a date for the decision as to whether there will be a judicial review, and the hearing will follow immediately if the judge decides that it will happen. So the defendant for that is Department for Transport, and Highways England and Historic England are named as interested parties. And on the 23rd of June, the judge will consider the grounds for the challenge, which are all related to cultural heritage, and decide whether to carry out that judicial review. If it goes ahead, then the hearing will take place immediately over the course of an estimated 3-day hearing. We don't know the timing for the judge's decision. It could be around the end of July. In the meantime, Highways England is continuing with the preliminary work and surveys and the procurement of the contractor. So that's Stonehenge. Last time we met, Sparkford to Ilchester hadn't quite reached its, hadn't had a decision on the DCO. Obviously, we've got that now. Secretary of State gave approval in January for the scheme, so that will be going ahead to do the 3-mile section of single carriageway between Sparkford and Ilchester. And on that, again, work to progress that is ongoing. The necessary surveys are all complete. They're now finalising the design with the contractors and planning for the construction phase, and we're planning to start work later this year. On the M4 to Dorset Coast strategic study that Highways England is committed to doing through RIS2, we've been having lots of conversations with the Western Gateway officers on this one to make sure we can join up as much as possible. That strategic study will be looking at options for ensuring a high quality route between M4 and the Dorset coast, including Bournemouth and Poole. We're expecting that the study will identify which corridor provides the main strategic route for the area, may recommend certain sections of route are trunked or detrunked to maximise that, and may identify some potential investments for improvement. The preliminary stage of the work is a scoping study to determine the scope of the strategic study. That is underway and nearing completion. So the final report in April will set out the scope for that strategic study and including the geographic focus and issues to be explored. We then need to discuss that with DFT to get approval for the strategic studies to follow on through that from that. We've been in close discussion, as I say, with the officers in the STB throughout that, including on the link with the Western Gateway corridor study, and indeed our project officer for our strategic study is also part of our membership for the OR corridor group. So we're looking for options all the way through to collaborate and partner on aspects of the work that can be useful to both organisations and see how we can align and maximise our joint working on that. The next thing was just to mention very quickly the engagement framework we've been working up for our engagement with STBs, and to thank the STB for involvement that you've had in the interviewing sort of process and gathering of information stage of that piece of work. We have just issued out some draft principles for the sort of output of that piece of work round for comment. So I'm very interested to hear what the STB officers or members think of that. And then following this sort of overarching sort of principles approach, we'll be looking to develop more tailored implementation plans with each STB. So we'll be working with that up with the officers over the next year. We are doing a presentation to the STB liaison meeting on the 9th of April for that, so the STB people attending that will hear a little bit more detail on that. Final substantive item is just to flag our latest safety campaign, Highways England's safety campaign on the use, keeping safe in the case of vehicle breakdown on the SRN, which is under the banner Go Left, because most of the actions and instructions around breakdowns are keeping to the left. So there are details on our website, and there's an advert being shown on primetime TV, that's also on the website if you want to see that. And just finally, to finish with a bit of forward look coming up in the next quarter, there's a couple of things that I think will be of interest to the STB and I'll include in my next update, which are the launch of the route strategies. So those will formally be launching in the next quarter, as will our decarbonisation strategy within Highways England in terms of the decarbonisation activity that we can do around the SRN and our own activities. And I think I will finish there if there are any other questions.
Lovely, thank you, Alice. Has anybody got any questions for Alice? Nope. Okay. I saw Sam is back from Swindon. Are you still here, Sam, or have you faded away again?
Thank you, Chair. I hope you can all hear me this time. Apologies.
Yes, we can. Carry on.
Thank you. So I'll keep it brief. David has obviously just touched on the Towns Fund announcement and the £19.5 million, which allows us to progress delivery of our new bus boulevard and also to prioritise some schemes within our heritage action zone. So that's great news. We're working very closely with our colleagues in England's Economic Heartland to develop the connectivity study for Oxford, Swindon and Didcot. Members will be aware that's a multimodal study, and we hope to be in a position to confirm the scope of that study over the next few weeks. I'm happy to share further information on that in due course. We are currently undertaking a significant investment programme, particularly towards the east of the borough, which helps to improve capacity on the existing highway network, but also enable development opportunities, particularly at the new eastern villages. I'm pleased to say we are broadly on programme with that, despite some limited impacts of COVID-19, particularly with contractors coming to site. So that's good news. We're also working closely with our adjacent authorities to determine the transport modelling scope, which will underpin our local plan review. That is subject to a second round of consultation in the summer, and you'll appreciate that we are looking very closely at our scenario testing as we continue to respond to the economic challenges of COVID-19, but also market conditions, particularly mindful of the impacts of future development at Honda. The only other thing I was just going to make members aware of is that we are working on the implementation plan, which underpins our decarbonisation strategy. So Cabinet have just approved the decarbonisation strategy for Swindon. Transport is obviously a critical part of that, and we are making good progress with our electric vehicle charging, but also opportunities with our bus operators to move to alternative fuels as part of our passenger transport strategy.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, Sam. Has anybody got any questions for Sam? Nope. Okay, can we move on then? Network Rail. Is somebody here from Network Rail?
Yeah, afternoon, Chair.
David, Daniel.
Daniel, that's right, yeah. Thank you. Daniel Round, Head of Strategic Planning for the Western team at Network Rail. So I'll just give you a brief headline update on what's happening across the industry. And I'll start with rail demand, which continues to be lower than we would currently like in the pandemic, but we are beginning to see, as restrictions are lifted, an increase in patronage numbers across the route, which is encouraging. And operators are now planning service increases back to pre-pandemic levels, in line with the government's roadmap as lockdown restrictions lift. So at each stage, there will be an uplift in services to meet the forecasted demand at each stage. So that's a positive, because clearly it's been a testing year for the industry, and a rather expensive one for government, keeping the industry afloat over the last 12 months or so. So the sooner we get passengers back on our services and revenue coming back into the industry, the better for all of us. What we have interestingly seen is that although commuting into London is nowhere near where it was pre-pandemic, commuting into some of our regional centres, the Exeters, the Bristols, Readings of this world, we have seen that journeys into those, although lower, have been higher than we were anticipating, and they've tended to hold their own in terms of numbers of passengers. So that's encouraging. And obviously last summer we saw a significant uptick in passenger numbers during the leisure market period as well. So that's positive, and we aim to see the same again this summer. So there is light at the end of the tunnel, as they say. Just on our update on our strategic studies. So many of the Western Gate officers have been working with us and other industry partners. Thank you for that again, for your input on our strategic studies. So there's a number of those that are nearing completion now. So Bristol to Birmingham and Bristol to Exeter are due to be in kind of final report stage during April. And colleagues of mine in Wessex are continuing with their Dorset study, and we're also jointly working with Highways England on a joint study looking at freight movements between Southampton and the Midlands. Now, whilst that's outside of the Western Gateway geography, that's driving predominantly at trying to transfer more road freight and road haulage onto rail. So would bring benefits to the wider highway network across the kind of southern England geography. And next year, our main strategic study in the Western Gateway area will be looking at Bristol suburban study, working with, again, Western Gateway officers and industry partners, and particularly picking up the points that David just raised in his update about union connectivity, whilst we'll be looking at all of the suburban area of Bristol and what life beyond Metro West begins to look like. We will really also be focusing around things like Cardiff-Bristol connectivity as well. So we will commence with that study early into the new financial year, and we will follow the same path that we followed this year with our studies, working closely with partners to work on those studies collectively. All of those studies are also just looking at James's paper later in the meeting around how you're taking forward your rail strategy. One of the things that we're keen to see progress by James and the other officers is access to stations. And one of the things that these studies all look at, our strategic studies, is what we call first mile, last mile opportunities of how do people access our network on the railway, because it's becoming growing importance that we join up the kind of highway network and the rail network together to provide an overall kind of transport solution for the travelling public. So that's good that we can work with James on those as that progresses and align that with some of the outputs from our strategic studies. One of the other big work areas for us at the moment is the Restoring Your Railway programme. I'm sure many officers and members will be aware of this, but this came off the back of the last Conservative manifesto at the last election about reopening old railway stations and railway lines to bring back connecting communities who don't have direct access to rail services. We've been incredibly successful across the Western Gateway geography at securing funding to take some of those bids forward. So in round one, which was announced middle of last year, there's two projects there that we're actively engaged with. One is for new stations between Wellington and Clumpton, which is again just off patch, but between Taunton and Exeter. And they've just submitted their strategic outline business case for consideration, and we're hopeful of some positive news there. And we continue to work with Wiltshire and colleagues on the Devizes Parkway proposal, and understand that the strategic outline business case will be submitted for that in the coming months. So that there's two really good projects progressing forward there. Round two was announced off the back of the recent budget, and again there was projects there that have been identified to funding to progress with their strategic outline business case. So St Anne's station just outside Bristol Temple Meads, we're working with Bristol City Council on that. A new station at Langport Somerton, just in Somerset, and an interesting project providing a light rail link potentially from Cirencester to Kemble, the station at Kemble, to provide connectivity to the heavy rail network there. And round three has just the bids have just been submitted for round three of Restoring Your Railway at the beginning of March. An assessment is underway on those bids, with announcements to come forward after the local elections, so in early summer. And we continue to work on the Porter's Head proposal with colleagues from Wecker and North Somerset, because that is also technically classed as a Restoring Your Railway proposal. So that's make good progress on that one too. And then outside of all of that, the big infrastructure works that will be happening on the network over the summer are all in relation to Bristol East Junction. So this is the junction for us directly outside of Bristol Temple Meads, and is the key junction that has wide-reaching impacts across the whole region, really. We're due to upgrade that junction over this summer, and works have already commenced on that, but the main blockade will take place over this summer, and communication plans are already being put in place with all the relevant authorities to make sure that the travelling public are kept up to speed on progress there. So those are the kind of headlines. Chair, more than happy to take any questions from any members.
Lovely. Thank you, Daniel. Has anybody got any questions? Oh, there's a hand up there. Jeffrey Richardson.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick question there on the Bristol East. I'm just wondering, I mean, presumably you're waiting to the summer for some reason, because presumably if the use of the railways is diminished at the moment, wouldn't this be an ideal time to actually implement any large changes?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, given the scale of infrastructure that's planned, this is being planned for years in advance. So we were already heading for that. We've been able to do some advanced works at the junction, which means that we've been able to slightly reduce the time that we'll be on site in the summer. But unfortunately, these things take a huge inordinate amount of planning, and we haven't been able to bring that work further forward, because we are in a chain of events that lead us to that point, and we've been in that chain of events or critical path for a couple of years now.
Okay, thank you.
David Carter, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I think Daniel's probably too modest to say it, but we don't want Network Rail to accelerate it, because we need to put the eastern entrance in at the same time as you're doing the Bristol East Junction works. So there's a £25 million investment in cracking a hole in the side of Bristol Temple Meads to create another entrance. That's a very simplification of a very difficult project, but that's all linked together, I think, Daniel, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, we will be taking advantage of having of being able to do our track work at the same time as putting the rather big hole in the side of Bristol Temple Meads. So,
and it's saving us a substantial amount of money in track possessions as well.
Yeah, huge amounts. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much. So obviously mutual benefits there and coordinating the work. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Just to say, apologies, I have to leave at 3 o'clock, but happy to take any questions that may come up after that offline with officers.
Okay, that's kind of you. Thank you. All right. Thank you, everybody, for your updates. Can we move on now to agenda item 5 then, which is paper A. Nuala, you're going to talk us through this one, which is the work programme and financial update.
Yes, thank you, Bridget. Just to note, Sarah kindly sent around a revised version of the paper, so we should everybody should have that in their inboxes. So just to take you through a couple of items. Essentially, this paper's purpose is to note and update you on delivery progress in the overall programme. There are some things that are, as David Linus already gave an overview on, there are some upcoming Department of Transport strategy and policy papers on decarbonisation, rural mobility. We've just had the national bus strategy. Sorry, David, I haven't got the name right on that one. So we will be asking to obviously flex the scope of our projects in relation to what the Department of Transport articulates as part of those strategies. What I am looking for a decision from today's board is to ratify the port plan for the next financial year, so that we can go back to the Department of Transport with our projects and draw down that funding. So that's an overview of what this paper covers. In relation to the forward work programme in section 1.4, the current work programme for 21-22, we have commenced work. We'll be commencing work shortly on building our strategic model. Just to give you an update, we've had some very good conversations with the department in relation to the model, and it was agreed that we should use the 2015 Highways England model. We will be doing a sense check against the 2019 model when that comes out later on in the year. I shan't go into too much detail on the strategic transport plan because Ben's going to provide you with an overview about that next. But we are almost ready to push the button on by the end of March on consultancy support to progress that. We've had our inaugural transport corridor meetings in early January, and they were quite successful. So it's looking good in relation to that programme. So in relation to the forward plan for next year, also to explain, we've also progressed work in relation to our carbon audit project. So we've been working quite closely with Midlands Connect in relation to their scope. So essentially what we've identified is that Midlands Connect has a very good model for looking at carbon baseline and carbon scenario planning. So what we are progressing that contract, so that should be very useful to our local authority members as well as to the Western Gateway. It will provide it's quite a useful overview to councillors and officers alike about what the different policy levers are and their impact on carbon and achieving our carbon targets. So in relation to a decision request for this board, the forward plan for next year essentially is what we articulated in December's board. So we are going to progress our strategic model. That funding will be taken from obviously this year's funding. We are going to progress our strategic transport plan. We also have on our list strategic cycling, the freight strategy, which obviously we had in plan for this year, but due to officer resources, we need to slide that project into the next financial year. We will be looking to do progress rural mobility, alternative fuels vehicle strategy, and strategic bus and coach strategy as part of our forward plan. And obviously, James will articulate the strategic rail implementation plan in a later paper. So I'll just pause there for the board to just ratify that we're still comfortable to take forward those items in our forward plan for the next financial year.
Thank you, Nuala. Has anybody got any comments? My only little nitpicky one was that in the table in paragraph 1.4, it doesn't include strategic cycle routes, although it is mentioned on page 14 that is work that's being done. So, you know, when you produce the minutes or a revised programme, could you just make sure that's included so we've got good sight of that particular project? Yes, and indeed that's been updated in the paper that Sarah's just sent out. Oh, right. I'm sorry, I missed it then. No, that's fine. Thank you. Right, who else has got their hands up? I've got a. Is that trying to see who that is? Jeffrey Richardson.
Yep, lovely. Thank you, Chair. I just wondered if there's a little bit more information about the idea of working with Midlands Connect on the alternative fuel strategy and the fact that it includes commercial vehicles as well as non-commercial vehicles, which was where our alternative fuel strategy was. I'm actually in favour of that, but yeah.
So in relation to alternative fuels, what Midlands Connect have articulated is that they've been doing some work with Skanska and freight operators in their area. They have come up with, effectively, they've come up with a map which outlines locations for potential electric vehicle charging points for HGVs and I believe it's LGVs as well. That is of interest to us because if it's done at a national level, that makes sense. So at the moment, we've indicated that we are interested in taking part of that along with the other, I believe, other STBs at a national level so that we can come up with a national view on that. So that's what that really is about, and actually it makes financial sense for us as an STB to tap into that piece of work. We still need to think about what we're doing in relation to non-HGV and LGV vehicles, but that scope of work needs to be determined and thought about properly, really. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, does that mean we be pursuing our own alternative fuels for non-commercial vehicles alongside this, or would we put it all together with Midlands?
To be determined. At the moment, their scope of their works is purely in relation to HGVs and LGVs. They have done, and they are planning to do some thinking in relation to wider scope, but that's not been determined. And I know a lot of our members, for example, South Gloss and Baines, have been thinking about their own EV strategies and what they do in relation to their own networks. So I think what we need to make sure is that while we do and should tie in at a national level, we also pay attention to what our members are doing, so we don't effectively duplicate efforts in relation to this, because we don't want to be spending money twice when people, our members, or at a national level have done something sensible. So it's about seeing what people are doing, tapping into where the gaps are, and then sort of spending our money wisely where we need to.
No, sounds very sensible. Thank you.
David Glennos, I think you've got your hand up, have you?
Yeah, I have. Thanks for that overview of the paper, Nuala, most useful. Just a couple of things to emphasise. Obviously, the business plan proposal which you submit to us following this meeting, that would need to include additional detail than sort of the headline title of each of the work packages, just so that we can make sure we know what all the work is about and properly brief our ministers to make sure they're comfortable with the proposals which you are proposing to take forward over the next year or so. And I know you're already doing it, but just to emphasise again the need to work cross STB where it's appropriate to do so. See that you're already doing it on sort of electric vehicle related stuff, alternative fuels, but there's probably scope to do it on some of the other areas such as freight as well. But I know you're taking that forward, but it's worth making that point anyway. But yeah, we look forward to receiving your more detailed sort of proposal for how you're going to spend the 21-22 monies over the next few days. Thank you.
So David's hand is up.
Yeah, David.
Yeah, so just to add on the national bus strategy that David introduced, and we had a placeholder in the programme, we're going to have a look at the next senior officers group at what level we look at that, because a lot of it will be inter-authority, LTA to LTA, and some of it could be at Western Gateway level, and also it could be pan-regional. So as David's just mentioned, we're going to have a look at that. We've got some routes that go into the peninsula. There is probably one or two that go out of our route into Midlands Connect, but certainly down into Solent and Transport for the South East in that case. So we'll certainly have a look at that. I think one of the things that we haven't concluded is to what level we would look at what things, but certainly give ourselves some space to have a look at it and perhaps bring it back to the board in a couple of months' time with some conclusion on that. It's quite a compressed piece of work. I think David Glydos, we've got a lot to do. There's 3 stages to the process to be able to output it. And also there is some guidance, I think, which you're going to publish, David, in due course, which will tell us quite how the modelling might work, or certainly how you envisage it going forward. Thank you.
Just if I may, in response to both Davids, in relation to the forward plan, so what we've already discussed, alternative fuels, in relation to the strategic cycle routes, we're currently discussions with Sustrans. I know that there was a public question about e-scooters and increasing the limits of strategic cycling. So those are the kind of conversations that we are planning to have a discussion with Sustrans on, and also obviously working with cycling officers from the different member groups, which I think will help. In relation to freight, we've appointed Ewan Wilson as lead on the freight strategy, so he's in conversations with the other STBs, specifically Transport for the South East, in relation to what they're doing. I do think he needs to have a more of a detailed conversation with Daniel and with, I think it's Emma from Highways England, in relation to their freight strategy work. I think so. Those are the kind of conversations that we do need to have to make sure that when we articulate our scope, it's a fully informed and rounded one, and one that doesn't sort of duplicate effort. So and also in relation to rural mobility, I think we would be wise to consider what the Department of Transport is saying in relation to rural mobility and connect it to the bus strategy to inform our scope. So I just thought that were useful points to note. So in relation to what the request from officers is the board comfortable with the forward plan for next year as it stands? So I think there's a question from somebody as well.
It's probably me. I've got my hand up. Just Alice from Highways England. Just mentioning it's quite a long list of thematic studies, which is good to see. But you haven't mentioned in here your corridor studies, and I assume you would include that in your work plan for this year.
Oh yes, sorry, I didn't mention it deliberately because Ben is going to give an overview in the next session, as is James in later papers. So they're absolutely, all of the studies that we're doing are inputs into our strategic transport plan, and they will help inform and make it a richer strategy. Alice, sorry, apologies. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So we're just part way through this paper, and I think Nuala, you probably want us to recommend items 1 and 2, which is little 1 is note the update on delivery progress and overall programme, and 2, agree to delegate any amendments to scope to the senior officers group based on the outcomes of discussions with National STP group and following the publication of the Department of Transport's decarbonisation, rural mobility and national bus and coach recovery plans. And 3, ratify the 2021-22 forward plan and approve the STB's request to draw down 2021-22 funds from the Department of Transport for these projects, which are listed. Oh, we've got the next one. Okay. Do I have your agreement to those 3 items? We're happy with that?
Agreed.
Yes.
Please shout if you don't agree. Thank you. Okay, Nuala, do you want to move on then to the financial plan?
Thank you, Bridget. So in relation to the financial finances for this year, there's a corrected budget in the most recent paper. Our books are balanced, just to confirm that. There is, so in relation to those, due to officer resources, we will be asking to move alternative fuels and freight into next year. We are raising the purchase order, you'd be delighted to know, David, today for our carbon audit study. So that will go into this year's budget. In relation to the strategic modelling, the same. So we should have instructed and be raising the PO at some stage this week. In relation to our strategic corridor, our phase 1 strategy, we've had our procurement lead confirm that we have 2 bids that are in preparation. They're due for moderation and review next week, and we will be looking to spend and draw down that money within this financial year. I don't think there's anything else of particular interest to call out in relation to this year's finances. You will note that there is some underspend in relation to the programme team that is due to resources. That's all the particular call outs for this financial year. In relation to our forward forecast for next year, only thing to note is that we have increased our staffing budget in relation to programme costs to be met by the STB's own fund, where it is appropriate and people are delivering directly for our projects. There may be some charges in relation to the project budgets from the DFT, but they will be tied to delivering specific outputs for those projects. That is the only call outs that I was planning to do in relation to the finances, Bridget, unless anybody has any particular questions.
Okay, has anybody got any particular questions? David Kleinos, can I just ask, you're happy, are you, that the alternative fuels and the freight fundings is moved to next year?
Well, it's something we'll need to pick up in our regular sort of programme governance meetings. I think the next one's later this month, Nuala, so we'll pick that up.
Yeah.
I'm hoping we can be as flexible as possible on that, but obviously it would be good if you could demonstrate some beginning of the work or the procurement process.
Yes, understood.
Okay, has anybody else got any comments Or can we move forward to the recommendation that we just note the financial update? All happy? Just shout if you're not. No shouting. All right. Then we've noted the financial update. Thank you, Nuala.
Thank you.
Okay, if we can move on now to next item on the agenda, which is agenda item 6, and I hand over to Ben Watts to give us an update on the strategic transport plan. Ben.
Thank you, Chair. I've actually provided a few slides for this item, so I think Nuala, are you okay to share screen? I think you're driving this presentation. There's only going to be a brief run through about where we are with our strategic transport plan. It will just go into a little bit more detail about the work with strategic corridors. Yeah, Nuala, are you okay to get the presentation up? Okay. Whilst Nuala's just doing that, the first thing I really just wanted to highlight was, of course, that we adopted our existing strategic transport plan back in December, and that was subsequently published on our website in January. So the first one really covers the initial 5 years, 2020 to 2025. It was informed by existing local authority evidence, but it outlined really what our long-term aspirations were for developing our strategic transport plan. So we introduced long-term objectives. We also adjusted the plan in response to feedback from our stakeholders, and as opposed to it being focused on our corridors, which we're about to talk about in context of the long-term plan, within the short-term plan we kind of removed that focus and put it around modal aspects and what our priorities were for different modes within the strategic transport network. One of the key changes also was just about outlining the process for beginning that long-term plan. So work commenced on the long-term plan in January this year. As is always mentioned, we had our first round of our strategic partnership corridor meetings. Now, there were 4 of these meetings, each one representing one of the strategic corridors. And one of the advantages of this approach was that it is outside the Western Gateway. So, for example, we are talking to neighbouring STBs and talking to neighbouring local authorities and also strategic infrastructure providers. The idea really is that this is a full corridor approach, and I can come into a little bit more detail about what the corridors are in a couple of slides. But one of the other key things that we're doing for this long-term plan is it really kind of brings forward new evidence, new regional evidence. As Nuala's just outlined, we've got quite a large programme planned for the next couple of years, and all of these studies and all of the things that we're planning on doing will feed into this long-term plan. It will also then be supplemented with the 4 transport corridor studies. The idea is that these corridor studies will identify a sequence set of transport investment priorities, and then once completed and approved, hopefully in March 2023, we can then use that as the basis of influencing future investment decisions. So the way that we've kind of set this programme up is that we've identified it in 3 key phases or stages. The actual delivery dates are currently under review. The reason why we're reviewing those at the moment is that we need to talk to our consultant when appointed, and as Nuala's already explained, we should hopefully be able to do that within this month, so they can start from the 1st of April. The other thing is that we've got to do is we're talking to Highways England, and Alice has already mentioned this about the M4 to the Dorset study. We want to ensure that both studies do progress simultaneously, so we're working together just to finalise when certain aspects will be completed. But essentially, the stage 1 study is focusing on identifying a baseline and also identifying the type of long-term transport scenarios we want to get tested within our new transport model. So once appointed, the idea is that the stage 1 study will probably conclude around autumn time, so September, October this year. Within this work, it will go through and provide an updated story of place, which is the document that we produced for our major road network application back in 2019. But it will also just really start thinking about the type of things and the type of place we want to be and where we want to strive to be by 2050. So the idea is that we will run past these ideas about different transport scenarios with stakeholders. With a bit of luck, that should hopefully take place around June, July, August this year. There will be some work done in the background, particularly with senior officers, members of the board, and also our partnership groups, just to kind of discuss those so we really get a sense and start developing that strong narrative about what we want to get here. Once we understand what scenarios we want to test within our updated model, we'll then move on to the stage 2 assessment. The idea is that is likely to commence in the autumn, and subject to the number of scenarios we want to test, it's probably going to run into the next financial year. So if we probably spring next year, we'll be looking at concluding this work. Critical to this is that we agree as a group about the methodology, about how we're going to want to take that assessment, and that needs to be agreed by all stakeholders. So that will be discussed both in forms of technical meetings, but also through that stakeholder group, so everyone's aware of that and agreeing that base evidence that we produce from our updated model. There will then be a technical appraisal of the model, the different scenarios against our various social, economic, environmental criteria. Once we've got our technical assessment, we'll then move on to the final stage, which actually is the strategy production. So this is where we draw together the base of the other evidence base that we're working on, so the alternative fuels strategy, the freight strategy, James's rail strategy, and the other bits and pieces. And then we can then use that to populate our overall strategy, but also add a little bit more depth and detail into the individual corridor work that we're doing. Nuala, are you okay to move on to the next slide, please? So where we are to date, really, I'm just going to quickly run through. I have already mentioned parts of this, and other bits have been mentioned during the meeting. But in terms of progress to date on this work, in terms of procurement, we're about to appoint our lead consultant to undertake the stage 1 work. We've also started to have early thoughts and scenario discussion, both at the technical officer level, but also with senior officers. And there will be more work on that in coming months, well, sort of during April, actually, to discuss a little bit more detail of how we're going to work that out. The next thing really is just, and again, Nuala's mentioned it before, we have now commissioned, or on the verge of commissioning, our updates to our transport model. So that's been agreed by both Department for Transport and Highways England that we are best to use the 2015 model, use that for our testing, and then we will then use the updated 2019 model just for sensitivity testing of our preferred scenarios, and I think that will hopefully take place in 2022. In terms of stakeholder engagement, we held our first round of our strategic corridor partnerships in January, and I think they went very, very well. There was an awful lot of interest from the different stakeholders there, and it was a real good mix of people in attendance. We've got the next round of meetings at the end of April. As Jim's already mentioned, we also held the Transport and Business Forum last week, and again, there seemed to be genuine enthusiasm from people that are listening to what we're saying and want to get involved. So this is really, really encouraging. And also, as Alice has mentioned, obviously we've had meetings with Highways England about the alignment of their RIDS to Dorset Coast to the M4 corridor. In addition to that, we've also made data requests for local authorities and the highways data just to start informing that kind of regional evidence base and just starting to build up that narrative for each of the corridors. Nuala, is that okay? Just go to the next one, please. So this slide here just kind of highlights the corridor. So this is something not new, but I just wanted to just touch on where we are and some of the initial feedback from the stakeholder groups. So just starting off with the southeast to southwest group. When we kind of outset what we thought the focus of this work would be, we were thinking about network resilience issues and needing to manage seasonal demands and also the planned growth in the area. When testing that with stakeholders, that was largely what they agreed with. I think they were happy with what we were kind of looking at. Really kind of mentioned and wanted us to highlight the removal of existing capacity constraints, just to really recognise that there are network resilience issues and reliability issues within that particular corridor. In terms of the southeast to South Wales corridor, the actual map as shown there is actually it needs to be updated. One of the things that was really interesting from this group was actually how wide people wanted us to actually consider this, and it really is looking at those real links, union connectivity, links between Western Gateway into South Wales. So the actual scope of this study has actually been extended now to incorporate the M50, which is a little way north to the top of our area, through to and actually including the Heads of Valleys Road, so then links into Swansea as well. So one of the things on this was about union connectivity and really understanding how Anglo-Welsh transport networks could integrate. One of the stakeholders provided the classic example of trains between Manchester and Leeds. I think there's it's either 6 or 8 an hour, but the equivalent between Cardiff and Bristol is only 2 an hour. So it recognises that more can be done there. So the kind of study and the scenarios that we'll be looking at will be about strategic options going over the Severn Estuary and just how we can get networks to work better. With regards to the Midlands and South West study, we assumed that it would be looking at supporting growth. An awful lot of growth is identified along the M5 corridor, and that was largely agreed. I mean, the other thing that was also really kind of important that stakeholders mentioned was the importance of mode shift and recognising the role for rail. And it's great that Daniel provided an update about the studies that they've done, particularly with the Birmingham to Bristol and Bristol to Exeter, the route studies which will support that. But it really was just recognising that there's a huge potential for passenger transport to kind of help relieve and take some of the pressure off the M5 in this area. And then the last study is the big one, really, is the Midlands to South Coast. And as you can see, that pretty much covers the whole of our area. So again, one of the most important things that we need to do here is understand how north-south transport links can be improved. And that's obviously both facilitating both freight and transport demand, and also how to achieve economic agglomeration benefits between the regional economies and bring in better journey times and resilience. So there's an awful lot of work historically about this. There's need recognised it, and again, we've mentioned countless times today about the Highways England study. So that work's going to progress in tandem and make sure that we kind of share the results and share the outcomes of those studies. Lula, is that okay to just move on to the last slide, please? So the last slide.
Sorry, Ben, technical difficulties with my buttons.
Okay, so all everybody really was just here was just to kind of briefly summarise where we are in terms of the next steps. So consultant will be appointed to lead this work, the stage 1 work in the coming weeks, and then within April we're looking to review and confirm our programme. We need to host the workshop for developing transport scenarios, initially with senior officers, test that thinking within the second round of the strategic partnership groups. Moving into May, we want to then kind of really kind of agree what we're looking at. I mean, we've done a little bit of work on the transport scenarios, and as I'm sure you can imagine, there are a number of different combinations and a number of different things that can happen. So we need to get that very long list down into a short manageable list. So hopefully that will be achieved by May. So we'll have another kind of meeting with senior officers, but also really would welcome the board to get involved in this and actually understand some of the thinking and help guide some of the work that we're doing there. So there hopefully will be a workshop agreed in sometime in May. That will need to be confirmed, as I said, once the consultant is in place. The other bit of work that will be going on there will be just preparing our draft consultation document. Again, as I mentioned before, we want to understand what people's views are on the different kind of long-term scenarios that we're looking at. In June, when we next meet as a board, hopefully we'll be seeking approval on that consultation document ahead of commencing a public consultation. And then in July, we've got the third round of the partnership group meetings and the next Transport to Business Forum. So that the focus of that really will be kind of taking people through the consultation document and just kind of gauging opinion there. And then we'll be looking to procure consultants to lead on the stage 2 work. That was it really. It was just a very quick run through, so I'm very happy to take any questions if anyone's got any.
Okay, fine. Has anybody got any questions? Oh, I think there's some hands up. Let's see where they are. Somebody want to fire ahead? Jeffrey.
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much, Chair. Just a quick question, David. Are the adjacent STBs, are they also running with a corridor model? And if so, do they align with the ones that we are proposing?
The peninsula certainly are running with the corridor model, and they do align. And we're obviously within our area, we're focusing on we are talking about multimodal corridors, but just for the ease of this, if I can just refer to it like effectively the M5 corridor and the A303 and A31, A35 corridors. So they are looking at that. It's an approach that is similar. We've been invited to participate in their work, and also they're feeding in our work. So it is all kind of united. I believe the other STBs are taking similar approaches. And I assume that the corridors do align. There's nothing different really with what we're proposing because we kind of picked up on our strategic corridors. So I believe there will be, they will complement each other when we get round to actually producing our long-term plan.
Okay, lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. Alice has got her hand up.
I was just going to say, compliment what Ben was just saying there, with a bit more insight on transport for the South East. I've got 5 corridor studies that they've got 1 or 2 of them underway already, and others to be commissioned this year. But there's 3 radial routes into London, so sort of effectively north-south, but some of them are more diagonal than up and down. And then they've got 2 what they're calling orbital routes, so 1 more along the coast and then 1 sort of halfway up, and including the M25 kind of area as well. So there is some alignment in terms of the east-west kind of corridor and the London to the southeast. So there's alignment there, I think.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't think anybody else has got any questions, but thank you very much, Ben. That's good to get that update. Okay, can we now move on to the next item on the agenda, item 7, which is the Strategic Rail Programme. James White from WECA is going to update us on this. James.
Thank you, Chair. Well, this report follows on from the one that was presented to the December meeting of this board, which set out 3 priorities in terms of the task forces to take forward to implement the rail strategy. Members will recall that the rail strategy set out plans for creating 5 separate task forces. And at the December meeting, it was decided to focus on the Stations and Access to Rail Task Force, the Digital Solutions Task Force, and the Strategic Planning Task Force. There's a budget for this coming financial year of £65,000. So this report is very much about setting out the priorities for that budget. So this is effectively priorities within the prioritised task forces. I'd like to draw your attention to table 1 in the report, and this sets out for the Stations and Access to Rail and the Digital Solutions task forces the proposed programme for 21-22. For both of these, there's more detail in appendices 1 and 2. For the Stations and Access to Rail task force, the proposal is to focus the available funding on undertaking a station audit for all of the Western Gateway stations. This is very much about looking at access to and from the station and picking up Daniel's point earlier on about that first mile and last mile stations. But it will also be about coming up with a standard for Western Gateway stations in terms of provision of things like cycle parking, shelters, information, CCTV. And the idea is that we will then come back once this audit has been undertaken with a prioritised programme of schemes to take forward and to put into a potential future bid to the Department of Transport, for example. We're planning to use some WECA work which has been undertaken on looking at enhancing stations, using that as a template for the rest of the Western Gateway area. It will require a lot of local input from the Rail Officer Group for the Western Gateway, which brings in all of our councils, and it will probably need to be adapted as well to reflect there are different circumstances across the Western Gateway area. We're also going to try and do some work within the Rail Officer Group around car parking provision, and in terms of the targets for car parking that are included in the rail strategy. And one of the other conditional outputs in the rail strategy for this task force was about modal integration. So we will set up a working group through the Rail Officer Group to start taking that forward. But as I say, the principal amount of funding will go towards the station audit work. In terms of the Digital Solutions Task Force, this has no actual budget attached to it, so we are just planning to do work in-house using the Rail Officer Group and WECA and other local authority officers. This will build on some work that's going on at the moment into integrated ticketing. This has been undertaken by WECA. So as part of this, we will review all the various ticketing schemes that are in place across the Western Gateway area, and we will also explore the various interfaces that there are between those different schemes and what opportunities there are then for taking things forward. This work is very much of an exploratory nature. We recognise that there are going to be major cross-border issues here with neighbouring STBs, and indeed nationally. So we will see what comes out of this work. It may well be that pushing forward integrated technique is not something for the Western Gateway to take forward, but it needs to be done at a wider regional, wider national level. So we're just going to do some initial work in this coming year using existing in-house resources. Table 2 sets out the programme beyond 2021-22 up to 2023-24, and includes taking forward various other proposals. These will be subject to funding. That will still to be confirmed. But if funding does become available from whatever source, then some of these proposals, these actions, could be brought forward and implemented earlier. But I hope it gives some confidence that we do have a 3-year programme of work for delivering the rail strategy. There are the other task forces which were singled out in the rail strategy. The strategic one, it is a priority, but the proposal here is to put that on hold for the time being. Daniel talked about the various strategic rail studies that are taking place. So the proposal here is just to pause that work on setting up a strategic planning task force until the local CMSPs are all, sorry, local strategic rail studies, as they're now called, are all completed. In terms of the freight task force, we've heard from Nuala a bit earlier about the freight strategy work is going to be kicking off in the coming financial year, and the strategic transport corridors, which Ben was talking about, will also pick up freight as part of the whole multimodal approach. In terms of David Gluns's point about freight being very much a cross-boundary issue, we are talking with our neighbouring authorities, and actually Ewan Wilson is going to be leading the freight side for the Western Gateway, and myself, we're meeting the Peninsula's consultant for their freight work tomorrow to talk about how we can work together going forward. And then the final task force is the Future Ready and Resilience one, and we at the moment at least we are leaving that to the industry to lead, and I think that's also very much related to that strategic planning side and what comes out of the CMSP studies as well. So I think whilst we have a fairly limited budget for 2021-22, we are a little bit restricted in what we can achieve. I think we'll still be able to deliver quite a lot over the coming financial year, and we've got that more longer term programme to look forward to as well. So happy to take any questions on the update.
I see Jeffrey's got his hand up.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Just a very quick point, really. Sort of combination of the digital and the station work is the availability of digital at stations and the facilities for people to work at stations. So if you get a long transfer, you've got somewhere to go where you can actually do some work and not lose time. I don't know if that's part of your first, the stations and access to stations, or the digital solutions, but I think it would be possibly a useful thing to have.
Yes, I mean it's overlap between the two of them, but yes, that sort of digital connectivity is going to be part of that whole station audit process.
Thanks.
Okay, has anybody else got any comments? No, I can't see any other. Oh, Neil, sorry, I beg your pardon, Neil Butters. You're on mute.
Thank you, sorry. I was a bit late in finding the button. I was just wondering, James, about the national electrification scene, because what we really need to see is some kind of proposal setting out a rolling programme of electrification over the next several years. I know we've discussed this before, but can you see that on the horizon at all, or should we be pushing more for this? I'm thinking about particularly the so-called electric spine running north, overhead electrification out to Southampton up to the Midlands, and I believe there are diversionary routes proposed up through Trowbridge and so forth. Do you have any information on that?
It's a pity. I think Daniel has left the call, hasn't he, from Network Rail? He would be much better placed to respond to that than me. I think the answer is we're still waiting to see what the programme is going to be for implementing Network Rail's transport decarbonisation network plan. I think I got that right. So I think we're lacking. We know what the Network Rail want to do, of course, with the target to 2050 to electrify the bulk of the rail network. But that programme, which was initially suggested it was going to be coming out before Christmas, we are still waiting for. So unfortunately, I've got no other updates on the programme than that, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you. I'm just wondering, Chair, whether we might press Network Rail on this, or, well, the government, I suppose, in reality. Sorry.
You're on mute, Chair.
You're on mute.
Typical. Sorry. I think if we ask Daniel to give us an update at the next board meeting, if we make a specific note just to make sure that he's aware that we would like him to report to us on that, I think that ought to suffice, shouldn't it?
Yeah, that should be fine. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, lovely. No, I can't see any other hands up. So the recommendation is that the board is recommended to agree the 2021-22 prioritised programme and resources for the stations and access to rail and digital solutions rail task forces. And I assume, unless I hear any screams, object. Oh, I've hit mute again. Sorry. I assume I can't see any other hands up. Neil, you've still got yours up, but I assume that's a legacy hand. So let's take it that the board is all agreed with that recommendation. Thank you. Thank you, James.
Thank you.
Right. Moving on to agenda item 8. First of all, I mean, I need to welcome Priscilla here. She's here because Irina is on maternity leave, having given birth to a son on the 21st of February. So I'm sure we all send our congratulations to Irina, and welcome, Priscilla. Would you like to give us an update on media process protocol and contact details? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So the media protocol document, for which today we are seeking approval, this has been created to show how we intend to keep all the communications teams at each local authority and the West of England Combined Authority informed of all comms relating to future Western Gateway activities. So it also clarifies within the document the process for the management of any media inquiries. So all communications teams have now seen this document and they've had the opportunity to comment and review. So the document that has been circulated does include any comments that have been received. Within the document, information about Western Gateway and activities has also been included to give the comms team some information. So we would like to seek approval for this protocol so that the process can be implemented ahead of future activities, for which we'll be having comms activities for. If I just give a brief overview of the process. So for example, for a press release, the Western Gateway comms lead would draft all proactive communications on behalf of the Western Gateway. So if this was to be a press release, this would then be drafted, this would be shared with all the communications team so that any feedback and any edits can be provided and implemented by the comms lead. So from that, one single press release would be issued that all teams have seen and are happy with on behalf of the Western Gateway. And then from that, any media inquiries received related to the Western Gateway overall would be managed by the Western Gateway Communications lead. If it was a media inquiry directed at a communications lead at any one of the councils, then it would be managed if it was with regards to their jurisdiction. So today really is just to seek approval if we can go ahead and implement that process going forward.
Okay, thank you, Priscilla. David Glinos, you've got your hand up. Did you want to talk about this particular item?
Yes, hi. Just a very quick one on this. I've taken interest in this comms proposals here. I think it'd be useful if DFT is kept in the loop on any with any significant announcements, and perhaps that should be reflected in the protocol. The reason I mention that is that you're probably all aware that our ministers are very interested in comms of the STBs. We just need to make sure that Western Gateway needs to ensure that any external communications are not perceived by ministers as a sort of a lobbying activity. I'm sure they won't be, but if we put something in the protocol so we can just have a quick check on anything which is significant, which is going to be released, that would be great. I can provide some text on that if you would like. There's similar text which is being used for Midlands Connect, who've got a comms agreement with DFT, and that could be used if needed, and I'm happy to circulate that, as I said.
Thank you.
So do we need to wait for that before we can approve this, or can we approve this subject to approving next time the DFT wording that's going to go into the protocol?
I'm hoping it's pretty non-controversial stuff.
Well, you never know.
But you never know, indeed. It may well be.
All right, so let's just change it. The recommendation is we approve the Western Gateway STB media process and protocol document and its implementation, subject to agreeing the DFT. What, have you got a protocol? Is it a protocol, David?
It's a form. It's a few sentences essentially, okay, which we've used for some of the other STBs, and it'd be good if we could get that included in the protocol.
So subject to including the DFT standard wording on process.
Yeah, something along those lines, and I'll actually drop it into the text box now, the chat box, if that would be helpful.
All right. Lovely. Okay, everybody happy? I think so. I can't see any hands that are raised apart from yours, David, and we've noted your comments, and obviously we will happy to include that. Okay.
Thank you.
I think that's have we got any other business? Item 9 on the agenda. Has anybody got any other business? No, I can't see any hands up. So, all right, and in that case, I want to thank everybody for attending this meeting, and to all those who've got elections in May, good luck, and maybe you or we may see some new faces here in the June meeting. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you, Chair. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Chairman. Bye-bye.